gratified that because of the way that we sort of went about trying to do this audit, almost word for word, the recommendations that we made actually made their way into motions and are going to make their way into some significant changes that were brought by Joe Buscaino and by Englander, and with the mayor's support. Also, I had chaired, as I mentioned, the Commission on Revenue Efficiency, in which one of the issues we had was about the parking occupancy tax and the failure of the city to get a lot of that money. It's money we already pay, that 10% tax. Sometimes we pay it in cash and then it gets absconded by certain parking operators. They took the exact language that was in there and actually are translating it into what's going to be changes in the law.
Matt, what questions do we have from the audience?
Well, I want to do a couple follow-ups because there were quite a few questions. And again, some of these questions, you guys, I can't read your writing, so I'm not going to be able to. But
you've got to tweet your questions instead of doing this on paper. You got to get with the 2014. This is not 1970 anymore. You got to be tweeting this.
Do you see the audience you're speaking with?
Can I tell you something? You know, my father's 93, my mother's about to turn 87, and she's on Facebook. So
is she tweeting?
She's not tweeting,
okay,
but she's on Facebook.
All right. So these are questions from the audience. So if you guys will come back to these questions on the DWP audit. Thank you, Jules. Jay Weitzler, Wilma. If you guys want to raise your hand so we can address you. Royce, can't read your last name. I'm sure there's not a lot of Royces here. Okay. And Gene Cohen. They all had questions about the DWP audit. Jay's question in particular, and you did touch on some of those, but Jay asks, and this is a few people have asked the same thing. The audits that the city's agreed on this DWP audit only goes back 1 year.
No, 5 years.
5 years.
For your office?
I'm sorry?
Yeah, 5 years audit by your office?
5 years audit by our office, yes.
Okay, good.
And let me also add one other thing to this, which is there were 3 lawsuits that resulted from all of this, okay? One was based on the subpoenas that we served, and then we got sued over it, and then the court agreed with us that this should be public. 2 of the lawsuits would go away pursuant to this agreement, if, by the way, they comply with it. The 3rd lawsuit, which is that one, I wanted it to stay alive, and it is going to stay alive because I believe that we are going to prevail in the appellate court on this. And when that occurs, then once and for all, there will be a court ruling on this that says that we have the right to it for all time, going backward and going forward.
And what's going to happen with the money that is there? Is it going to go to employee bonuses, lowering rates? What's going to happen with the money if you do prevail?
Well, what I did was, on the 1st of July is when a payment would have otherwise been made to the trust, and this is pursuant to labor agreements that had been entered into over the course of the years. The charter, section 262, lays out the conditions that have to be met for me to make certain payments. I can't just, decide I want to write you a check tomorrow and write it. There's certain due diligence requirements, needless to say. So based on that, I felt that the due diligence requirements had not been met for me to issue the $4 million of payments, and I withheld that payment. And I have continued to withhold that payment. Now, we are going to be doing these audits. If we find anything that would be referred to any kind of law enforcement agency, then those payments will continue to be withheld. Moreover, if we find and if we deem that there has not been cooperation by the trust or by IBW in the audit that we are conducting, and in the unfettered access, and the agreement specifically states we're supposed to have that, if in fact we don't get it, again, I will continue to withhold that payment. It is my sincerest hope, quite frankly, that we conduct the audit, we find that all the money has been wonderfully spent and that they've achieved great results in their training and safety programs. We shall see.
It's a little bit of a double-edged sword, though, in the sense that the city relies on so much transfer of funds from the DWP money into the general fund, and so the 15 council members who benefit from the use of that money as our custodians or whatever. So it's a little bit of a conflict as far as what's going on with DWP in the city of Los Angeles. How about a lot of conflict?
I don't know that I would describe it as a conflict per se. Part of the reason that there is, it's the so-called power transfer, but it's actually a transfer of money from DWP to the city's general fund on an annual basis. The original logic for it, as it were, was that if DWP was a private company, instead of being a public utility, that there would be a certain amount of property taxes that would be paid by that entity, there's a certain amount of business taxes and other kinds of revenues that the city would have. And therefore, there was a rough calculation, how accurate it is today is a different question, of what some of those revenues would have been, and therefore certain monies that were then paid to the Treasury to make up for that difference. But certainly the city is dependent on that transfer of money each year because we've got a really tight budget and will continue to for the next couple of years.
But it's not a percentage like a tax would be. It's just a flat dollar amount that is it.
It's not. It's sort of it's a complicated calculation, and it changes. But it is based on a variety of different factors. And there were some questions, for example, when DWP had trouble collecting money because of the snafus of being very kind when it comes to billing, of whether they would meet their revenue expectations and whether the city would therefore get the amount that was anticipated. They've sort of made up a lot of that money, so they'll probably be able to pay what it is that was anticipated.
Okay, we typically ask the easy questions first.
Okay.
So now that we're done with DWP stuff. So this is from George Johnson. Are you here? George? No George? Okay. How much is the controller's job influenced by politics?
Interesting question. I think that everything is politics in one way or another, but at the same time, one of the reasons that I was really interested in this job is it's probably, and certainly at its best, the least political of all of the political jobs that you can have. I kind of get the ability to call them as I see them. That may make some people happy some of the time and make other people not happy some of the time. One of the nice things also about having sort of come into office, not having previously been in office, and with not a lot of people having originally expected that I would win, is that I really don't owe anything to anybody, so I can sort of do what I think is right.
Good. Like that answer. Hopefully you'll stay clean.
Life is much easier if you do.
This next question is from Tom Grant. I love this question, Tom, because I know this bothers a lot of people in this room.
Okay.
A lot of the folks in this room, a lot of folks in the city of Los Angeles are very, very aware of recycling. And they put their stuff in their blue cans every day.
Yep.
And they put them out on the street, and then the blue can recycling truck comes to pick up the city pays for, and there's nothing in those things. There's nothing in those things because
Right.
scavengers are out there and they empty the cans for the city.
Yep.
And they get the revenues, and the city loses approximately $64 million every single year in revenues that aren't collected.
The city loses some money, not 64 million, as a result of that. I mean, we could probably talk about what those numbers are, and everybody calculates it in a somewhat different way. But certainly, I think you can say that the city loses at least several $1 million a year in revenue over this. There are a couple of issues. First of all, it should be noted that so many of the recycling rules that have been set up were not really necessarily about creating revenue for the city, but they really were about complying with the recycling requirements in the state, for example, AB 939, as well as just having a much more environmentally responsible policy in the city. So in the same way that, by the way, parking tickets are not really supposed to be about dollars, they're supposed to be about sort of parking enforcement. They've sort of turned into something about dollars, as we all know. But the focus of the recycling program is not necessarily, at least theoretically, supposed to be about dollars. But having said that, we know that there is value to a lot of this material. One of the difficulties is that you can spend a lot of revenues and a lot of resources chasing after the people who are going in these bins, but that's pretty expensive as well. One of the things that I've heard discussed is how do you turn this into more of a administrative citation as opposed to, say, a criminal kind of prosecution. It should be noted that what you're talking about in terms of it being stolen out of the bin is for residential purposes, because the city collects trash for 1 to 4 units. Beyond that, they're actually commercial operators that are doing the commercial trash, and they have their own set of issues separate from the city's issues in terms of what is being stolen. So I would favor actually looking at some sort of administrative citation program, maybe one that could be issued by a variety of different folks to kind of prevent this from happening. You're never going to prevent it completely. There are some systems where you put stuff in and then it kind of gets locked in there, but then it's also difficult for you to open up the bin a second time after you've locked it. But I think we can improve our collections on that and also make life better for the people who are often kind of accosted by those who are going into those bins illegally.
Set the bins out in the morning of the trash collection.
Yeah, it's interesting, part of it has to do with when you set the bins out as well. Needless to say, the closer that you set them out to the time of collection, the less time there is for others to make off with it. But not everybody necessarily can time it so that they run out there to the curb and get their trash there 5 minutes before the truck is about to pick it up.
This is from Hal, I think it's Schneider. I can't read the last name very well. Hal, are you here? There you go. Okay, good. How cooperative are the departments when undergoing an audit?
You know, it depends on the department. Some are more cooperative than others. And then it also depends on what you mean by cooperative. There's some that maybe have a great desire to be cooperative and that even welcome it, but are not necessarily very well organized in the way that they keep their data and their records. There are others that perhaps are less embracing. I have to say, our experience overall has been pretty good, because I'm not looking to go into the departments and just slam them and say you're doing this bad, this bad, this bad, that bad. Rather to kind of take the most balanced approach and to also ask them, okay, well, you're not doing X or Y, what are your impediments? And often when you speak to some of these department managers, there are real ways in which their hands have been tied because of certain rules that have been set up in the city, tied because of the civil service system, tied because of requests that have been made by the council or by the mayor, and you've got to sort of also understand what it's like to stand in their shoes and not just kind of criticize them, although sometimes they definitely deserve that criticism, but also kind of partner with them in finding a solution. With that kind of approach, I'm finding a lot more cooperation.
Randy Beckwith. Randy, you here? Good question here. Randy, you sure? There's a $500 gift certificate with this one. All right. Who determines what entities, such as Live Nation, pays to hold events? And why are the taxpayers having to pay $137,000 because of these events' expenses? What about paying to fill potholes, clean streets, etc. instead of that?
So this question is about actually the costs that were associated with the recent concert that was put on downtown. There was an estimate that was made by, I believe it was the CAO's office, of sort of what the costs would be involved in putting on that concert. And based on that, there was a commitment by the promoters of what it is that they would pay toward it. It turns out in the final analysis that the actual cost exceeded what the estimates were. I think it would behoove the city with these kind of agreements to make sure that there are provisions in the agreement that state that if costs exceed a certain amount, that we can then get those additional costs as opposed to just having a ceiling. Admittedly, the businesses want to have some sort of certainty of what that's going to be, but you can build in a certain kind of provision into the contract whereby you're not left holding the difference. Now, that said, there are a variety of different kinds of things that we do in a city that are about civic pride, or that are about creating a sense of place, that are about generating businesses downtown or any other part of the city. And not everything is necessarily about full cost recovery, because there are a variety of ways, A, to calculate that, and B, because, again, you want to have lots of different kinds of events in your city. So it's not necessarily a horrible thing that sometimes there may be a cost left over. But in this particular case, I think they would have been willing and should have been willing to pay the full cost. And it's a lost opportunity, but I think a lesson for the future in terms of how these contracts ought to be crafted.
Okay, we have 2 more questions. The next question,
You said one more question, right?
2 more questions. And I don't know if you can
We're going to
answer
need short answers.
short
Okay.
answers. For
I
the-
give complicated answers sometimes,
You
I
do.
know.
That's all right.
But these are
Richard?
complicated issues.
And I don't know if you can answer this. This is Joe over here is asking this question because this is, I believe, more of a state issue.
Okay.
But on Valley Vista and Van Nuys, there's a security guard that's there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, protecting a UCLA lab technician that there were picketers in front of their house. So the state pays, or the school pays for this security guard there 24/7. So is that something that you can comment on, or?
I have enough time and trouble figuring out city expenses without beginning to think about the state ones.
Okay.
So I could opine on it, but I don't think I could opine intelligently.
Okay,
on it.
the last question is from this guy named Matt, who's sitting right here. How much of your office can,
Is his last name Epstein?
yes,
Okay.
Epstein to you though. No, I'm just kidding. So, how much is audit versus policy? For instance, there has been talk for years and years and years, and going back to the DWP, about how the DWP, for transferring this money, they kind of had this, they have this side agreement or this agreement with the City of Los Angeles council members, where when certain folks are retired from council work, that certain members of those council, those staff can get jobs at the DWP, and those jobs, they basically just sit in a room for a certain amount of time and they don't do anything. But then they're allowed to collect pensions from the Department of Water and Power, as well as City of Los Angeles pensions. So this has been out there for a while. I know I'm seeing some jaws drop, but how much in your office, as you're doing an audit on the labors of DWP, the $40 million, but how much can your office influence some of the real corruption that's still going on in the city? And that's corruption.
So I'll say a couple things on the subject. First of all, I think there are many tools by which the controller's office and by which I can influence changes in public policy and in practice. The audits are one way to do it, although it's not the end-all and the be-all, which is why, by the way, we've spent a great deal of time on putting out data and more of it, and sometimes in tremendous detail for everybody to see on the web. Because we can do audits, for example, relating to payroll, and we do, and audits relating to various aspects of it. But at the same time, just putting up the data there for everybody to see also, I think, creates a different sense of accountability, and also hopefully will create much more pressure for better decision making when everybody, as it were, 24 hours a day can go online and see this information and have an opinion, sometimes a very strong opinion and a very upset one about some of the things that they see happening there. I wish I could say I could wave a magic wand and ordain changes at DWP or anywhere else, but it's much more of a process, and some of these contracts have been around for a long time and are problematic. But also what you do see is, because of the pay differential at DWP, and they've had great negotiators, let me tell you got to give it to them, for having been able to be so successful in negotiating with the city. You may be outraged, but they've been very successful. There are people I know, for example, even from my own office, that they get years of training and then they leave the city per se, and then they go work for DWP where they get paid 20-25% more, which has been a real brain drain on the city as a whole. That's an even more serious problem than the one that it is that you're expressing. And we've got, I think, over time to find a way to create much better parity in positions. Mind you, there are some positions that are in fact really unique to DWP, and certain ones that in fact you really want people to be very well paid for, and I want to have quality folks. But the pay differential is still very troubling.
The drain, can I just do a follow-up? I mean, again, the decision makers that are sending their people to these farms to get their pensions are the same people that are dealing with these great negotiators at the DWP. So,
Yeah.
you know, again, do you call it nepotism? Do you call it fraud? Do you call it abuse? But the thing is that, you know, does your office have that power to investigate those types of abuses?
Absolutely, we have the ability to investigate those things. Where you actually identify it as being nepotism versus fraud versus business practice versus the opportunity to hire a good person, these are often very difficult, truth be told, to kind of differentiate one from the other. But you have to look at the whole picture, and the whole picture is troubling.
Okay, can you come up, if Jules wants, as a raffle, and needs someone honest to pick the tickets.
All right?
And also, as you're going up there, Jules wants to make sure that you're at the toy drive on December 7th.
And I'll just conclude by saying thank you very, very much to everybody. There's so many things you could be doing on this wonderful evening, and here you are listening to talk about the finances of the city, my kind of people. And SOHA continues to do so much great work, not just for Sherman Oaks, but for all of LA, and really being watchdogs. So thank you very, very much.
Okay, let's do, Jules, you guys, what do we have? How many do we have?
First of all, I didn't hear your answer on the December 7th toy drive.
I don't check my iPhone. I don't know where I am 5 minutes from now.
It's Sunday, December 7th.
Okay, all right. I'll tell you what, we're going to check, then I'll get back to you before I leave the room. How's that?
Okay, you know, 3 people here are going to be rewarded with some great gift cards. The first one is going to be a holdover from last month because so many people left early that we never had a chance to do it. So the first one is going to be a $25 gift card to the Tellos Express. So Ron, if you'll pick out my number, please.
Okay.
I thought I avoided it.
Okay.
Read it without my glasses? Okay. 5, 1, 8, 6, 3, 3.
Yes.
3-3, who has 3-3? You don't, he doesn't have it.
No 3, 3?
No 3-3, pick again.
All right. Okay. 5, 1, 8, 6, 1, 4.
1-4, who has 1-4? And while you're taking the next ticket out, Steve Harris, candidate for City Council. If you want to speak to him after the meeting, he will be here, I'm sure, at the January meeting. Thank you. Okay, next.
Hold on, we have the one. What's the number, Jules?
614.
4, yeah.
Okay.
Yay!
Richard, David Rube also.
What?
David Rube also candidate.
Oh, I'm sorry. David Rue, also candidate for the City Council. He's here. Thank you. And he will be at the debate and the toy drive with
Okay.
tons of toys.
And next month.
And next month.
Okay. The next 2 gift certificates are $50 each for
Wait a minute, how much was Matt's? Vitello's?
25.
That's not mine, that was Tracy's.
Oh, Tracy, okay, okay.
We need 20 of
$50.
those.
It's a less expensive restaurant. This is for fans.
By the way, do you have a police commission business permit for this activity? I should sincerely hope so. Okay. 5, 1, 8,
Oh, we got
6, 4, 1.
4-1, who is 4-1? Going once,
Here.
raise your hand if you have it. All right, $50.
Can we take the money?
Thank you. And for the final $50.
Ron,
Yes.
you and I go back a long way, right?
Yes.
You better get me a winner right now. I'll read
You want
this
to talk
one.
about nepotism? All right, here we go. 5, 1, 8,
Yes.
6, 3, 4.
3-4, who is 3-4? Going once, 3-4. Going, there is a 3-4. Tom Grant. Oh, you're down too. We know you, Tom Grant. Show us the ticket.
Paper recycling, please, don't throw the paper in the trash.
You know,
Right,
Tom,
recycling and clean up
you're a
everything.
nice guy, you just...
And questions to the controller, ideas, come on up.